Hello, welcome to my channel. I'm Tiffany, a retired librarian turned homeschool mom, and in this video we're going to be looking at the HBO's film adaptation of Randy Shilts and a Band That Played On. So this is my DVD copy. I saw this film before I read the book, so please check out my video on the book. The book is far more detailed. It goes into a lot more. The film, after rewatching it, after reading the book, I realized how much they compressed this story and how they used specific characters or specific actual people and did composites. So, particularly someone like Dr. Don Francis, who was a epidemiologist and doctor, originally working with, he did a lot of stuff. Ebola in Africa, he worked on smallpox, and he was instrumental in working with hepatitis B. So, he was a person, he did exist. He was working in the beginning of the AIDS epidemic. He was working in Phoenix, Arizona at the hepatitis B lab before going to Atlanta. Now in the film, it very much focuses on him and why, yes, he was a real person and it shows certain things that he did in fact do. He also represents a lot of the doctors who were fighting for money for research and to save lives, and were not following the status quo. Their focus was trying to save people, not playing politics. And he represents not only himself, which, yes, that's what he did, but several other doctors. There was a couple in California, there was a couple in New York that were brought up in the book. And he very much represents that attitude and how in real life these doctors were fighting the government, trying to get money. They were fighting their own institutions. They were butting heads with various other people, including their bosses, on trying to save lives and trying to stop this before it got out of hand. And unfortunately, several of them, Don Francis, along with two of these doctors in California, lost their careers to it. They were ostracized because they put people over politics. So he very much represents that. They also, and one thing I'll point out particularly with him, because he's in the film, he is who you focus on. It's, you see a lot of him when he starts coming to, in 1983, when he comes to Atlanta. He's invited to work in Atlanta because he's an immunologist. He'd been working on the AIDS epidemic for the last 2 or 3 years at this point. And again, he's very argumentative. He's trying to get money because they need to do research. He's the one who really focuses and realizes this is an infectious disease. So that's kind of what he represents. Now, in this character specifically, there's a couple things they get wrong in their attempt to kind of streamline things. They show him as a workaholic, not that he's not, but he's also showed living in a hotel and single. He's not. He's married, he has kids. So during this time in Atlanta, his family came with him. So he was not living out of a hotel. I think they bought a house. So, because he was there for several years. He arrived in 83 and he was around, I think, I'm gonna bring up Don Francis really quickly here. I have the Wikipedia thing open. Let's see. Yeah, he started work on AIDS in 81, and then let's see. He retired from CDC, but yeah, he was to move back to San Francisco. It doesn't actually give me a lot of details, but he was the director of CDC's AIDS laboratory activities and worked closely with the Pasteur Institute, which is in France, which got him in trouble because, again, he was not playing ball. He was playing with the French. So But yeah, there's not as much information, but I know from the book that, yeah, he was in Atlanta in 83. He stayed there for several years, and he was married and he had kids. The film shows him as a single guy living in a hotel, which again is not true. But the film does very much focus on him. Another of some of the composite characters they show is a couple of the other workers in the CDC. You have, I believe, William Darrow. Bringing this up here. There we go. Bring back to the character list here. So, yes, is it William Darrow? Again, trying to find these things. Not yellow. Here we go. Yeah, Dr. William Darrow. Now, he was another epidemiologist. Now, what he's known for is he's the one who creates this. Basically, it's this study proving that AIDS is a sexually transmitted disease. So, and that's really what he is known for. There's not a lot of Wikipedia information on here. So what he did, and he shows this kind of what he was a part of in this film, where he was having conversations with a variety of gay men. He identified a patient O in this cluster study. And that's what, but it was misinterpreted patient 0. It was a French-Canadian airline steward who was having sex with a lot of people, and he ended up with AIDS and then spread it throughout this group, at least supposedly. That's what was believed at the time, and that's what Darrow did. And that shows what he's doing in the film. It shows him doing this questionnaire. This was also done by a variety of people at the CDC. This was a whole group thing. The other person they show that was kind of more of a composite character was, and they basically as a representative of what was going on, and that was Dr. Mary Guinan. So they show her, and this was done by a variety of people, doing these, basically it's a group study where they're going through a lot of different gay men who have this disease. They're working through various doctors and trying to figure out what they have in common. And so they're asking a lot of invasive questions. They do have a scene which is actually true, I have her specifically, where she's in San Francisco. The CDC has no money because Reagan administration, and they have no money. They're in a seedy hotel in San Francisco, and she's interviewing various people, and it basically shows her had her clothes all stolen at a laundromat. This happened. So this actually happened. She just this is actually in a scene with Richard Gere, who is playing an unknown choreographer. I do believe they, if you're paying close attention, they do actually identify him. I don't think the Wikipedia page is going to tell me. Let's see if they're going to actually show me. Yeah, Richard Gere is a choreographer, learns who he has AIDS. I believe he is identified. He's well known if you look on the IMDb page. But he represents, he's a major composite character, though he plays an actual person. He represents a lot of the closeted gays in the arts community that end up with this. So, and the person he plays, who I can't remember, he's a lot of people in the gay community were able to easily identify him, that he was well known, and he did in fact die of AIDS. So you have people like him. The big thing, and I'm going to go off a little bit here, with Richard Gere is he's, along with various other well-known actors, signed on. He was the first to sign on to this project at studio pay. And what that means is he pretty much took a massive pay cut to be in this, which was unheard of, where he's in a couple of scenes, and he chose to do this, to be part of this project. The other actors who chose to do this, who are big names, are Lily Tomlin, well known. She plays an actual person, Dr. Selma Dritz, who in the film they refer to her as Attila the Hun, which isn't entirely far off. This woman was older. That's one thing they get wrong. I just looked her up. She would have been in her 60s. when in 1980. She was born in 1917. But she was in the midst of San Francisco. She worked for the health department. She was instrumental in shutting down the bathhouses where the gay men were going in and having a great deal of unprotected stranger on stranger sex and spreading this like wildfire through the community. And she was instrumental later in getting these shut down. I do believe she retired, at least according to the book, in 1984. Because it mentioned somebody going to her retirement party, which makes sense because she's she's 63 in 1980. So yeah, she would have been older. So it would have been time for her to retire anyway. One thing to mention about her, and yes, she was, Attila the Hun probably wouldn't be a bad description of her. She, throughout the book, she's on top of this. She hates it. She wants those bathhouses closed. She sees people dying all around her because she's very much a part of this community. And she knows these people and she's pissed off. But again, she was older. But she is the one, in the film, they credit this to John Francis, where there's a scene where his boss walks in and he has this board set up that has the butcher's bill, which he explains came from Admiral Nelson during the Napoleonic Wars, and how he would ask every day for the butcher's bill, which essentially who's dead, who's dying kind of thing. This was actually something that Selma Dritz did. This was in her office, and she would periodically stare at this about who is dying and who has this, and staring at those numbers. And it made her angry because, again, she was desperately trying to get these bathhouses shut down, and that's what eventually she helped do, is get these things shut down. But Lily Tomlin chose specifically to be part of this. Couple of the other major actors who came in here, Ian McKellen. Sir Ian McKellen, he plays Bill Krause. Now, he's another kind of composite character. One, the actor is way too old for playing this 30-something-year-old man who was a congressional aide in D.C. and a massive AIDS activist. What his character represents is a part of the gay community, similar to Selma Dritz and some of the other doctors who wanted to shut down the bathhouses and promote safe sex and try and save lives. And this he was fighting against large parts of the gay community, particularly the owners of those bathhouses, who were prominent businessmen and figures in the community, and they were making money. And last thing they wanted was these guys coming in and shutting down their businesses, which they were earning. I mean, you'd get hundreds of men coming into these bathhouses a night. So they were furious. But his character represents that side of the gay community that's fighting not simply just to shut down the bathhouses, but to bring awareness of the disease, that it's killing people, that you need to take precautions, that you need to start practicing safe sex. And Bill Krause was very much hated by certain parts of the gay community. It does not show this in the film. He does go to France to get some sort of treatment and does come back to San Francisco and eventually dies. In the film, it shows him dying and having contact with Don Francis, which happens a little bit, but certainly not as much in the film. It shows a thing where he's in the hospital, he's speaking gibberish. In his head, he's saying, "I want my glasses." This happened not to Don Francis, it happened to a friend of his when he was still home. And that was what decided for them to send him to the hospital, where he did eventually die. But again, he was in his 30s. I think Ian McKellen was like in his 40s or 50s when he shot this. There's a couple of other major. Alan Alda, who's another big name actor, he actually plays a major character. Decently accurate, it's controversial. He plays Dr. Robert Gallo. Now, Gallo worked for the National Cancer Institute at this time, working on infectious disease. He was a cancer researcher. The film shows later in his life when he's become very interested in AIDS. Early on, he was not. The National Cancer Institute had limited interest until things started getting bad, and then they realized it was an infectious disease, and then they didn't want to give it up. They wanted to keep control over it, even though it belonged to another department. In this case, the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease, which was and still is, and God knows for how long, is run by Dr. Fauci, the guy who's been on the news so much with COVID-19. Yeah, he's been in charge of the allergy and infectious disease since 1984. So he's been in that job for a very, very long time. But again, Gallo didn't want to give that up. His actual major beef was with the Pasteur Institute, which is in France. They're the ones who isolated what we now know as the HIV virus. And there was lawsuits and arguments, and there was issues with Don Francis, who was working with the French, and Gallo was pissed off because Francis wasn't playing the game. He wasn't working with his own people. And that's part of what got Francis's career mostly destroyed, at least with the CDC. And Gallo is very arrogant. That's what's shown both in the book and in the film. Whether it is or not varies. He's a doctor in the 80s. Doctors, you have to face it, they have a tendency to be arrogant, particularly researchers at the top of their field, which he was. He missed out on the Nobel Prize in 2008 for discovering the HIV virus. That was given directly to the doctors of the Pasteur Institute. But his character also is a composite in a sense. It represents the doctors who at first were paying no attention, particularly the doctors at the National Cancer Institute. They were messing around with poppers, which is shown in the film. It's a cheap high that are being used at the bathhouses. So, but he also represents a lot of the doctors who were very, very arrogant about this and were very controlling and you see the rift between the National Cancer Institute and the CDC, where the National Cancer Institute thinks the CDC is trying to sabotage them and trying to take credit for the work on AIDS rather than working with them. So he very much represents the doctors on that side of things who are more concerned with their careers than saving people's lives. Though again, Gallo in real life he was the one who connected the HIV virus to the disease of AIDS later on. But again, he still, particularly in this film, represents those early 80s doctors who were more concerned about the status quo than about saving lives. So there were quite a few doctors who were like that, and he's the kind of the composite, though he is a real person. Let's see, there was a few other major actors in here that play very tiny parts. Let's see. Who was it? Right on. Or Steve Martin plays a very, very small part as a brother to an AIDS patient. And he represents a lot of things you see in the films, in the book, about families of closeted gays in the upper crust, so to speak. People who are hiding being gay from their families. In this case, his character in this, they come to him trying to prove that AIDS is in the, basically that they have someone who's of a higher caliber who might be able to be influenced. If this person had AIDS, then maybe they'll get more money because people will pay attention. And it shows that how basically Steve Martin's character finally admits, it's like, I knew my brother was gay. I wish he'd come to me. We know what he died of. But nobody else in the real family wants to acknowledge it. But he hands over the guy's address book, and they call a number, and it was a doctor that was well known for dealing with AIDS patients. They go and talk to him. Now in real life, something similar to this happened, but the brother was very open, and it's like, this was the guy he went to for his AIDS related issues, and he came right out with it, and they knew the name immediately. So in fact, I don't know if they're showing the name here. They are. It's Dr. Marcus Conant. So he was a dermatologist, and because this disease, AIDS started out not necessarily started out, but it started popping up, at least in this time period, as a skin cancer. So he actually ended up treating a lot of the AIDS patients. So, Angelica Houston is in here as well. What she does is she plays Dr. Betsy Ritz, who was one of the doctors who was treating babies and alerting the CDC essentially to the fact that this is showing up in babies, not only in the babies of IV drug users, but babies who are getting blood transfusions, and they're just basically piling on the opportunist infections. So those are, I think, the major well-known players in here. B.D. Wong, who wasn't famous at the time, he's more famous now. If you're not aware who he is, he's been messing around in various Jurassic Park films, and as well as more better known as playing a doctor in Law and Order SVU. So he actually plays Kiko. I can't pronounce his last name. Basically, he's the lover of Bill Krause, which I think might be a real person. Krause, I think his lover eventually leaves him, and he has another friend there. But again, these were major actors who wanted to be part of this because it was important work. And the film does a very good job of bringing the emotion to it, while massively compressing the book and the actual events. So again, mostly it follows Don Francis and how he's fighting, and then you have the bits and pieces of them trying to figure out what this is. And you have bits of them talking to Angelica Houston's character about the babies, about Steve Martin's character, about other family members, as well as bringing in Selma Dritz, where they're trying to get lists of names from the blood banks, which I don't think they actually did. I don't think they were actually able to accomplish that because the FDA was getting in the way. The film does not bring in the FDA. The FDA was massively in this. They were getting pissed off about the CDC stepping into their turf when it comes to the blood. And if you check out my book review on this, I go into a little bit more. But the film shows bits and pieces of this where the blood banks didn't want to test for anything. They insisted on there be more proof rather than a matter of, like, one, you have gay men are showing up with this disease and they seem to be spreading it amongst themselves. It's showing up in IV drug users. It's also briefly mentioned it's showing up in the Haitian population. That's literally one line, which is kind of sad considering that's how it actually got into the U.S. Was through the Haitian population. It came from Africa. They figured this out in the last decade or so. That's how AIDS actually got into the country. It came from Africa to Haiti into the U.S. That's how it got here. And it came from AIDS. So, but again, you have the blood banks that didn't want to admit it. They didn't want to test. And you see the arguments. There is one scene, it looks like a press conference. It's not an actual press conference. They have various academic conferences where Don Francis yells at the blood banks of how many people will it take to die from infected blood for you to care. It turned out it was quite a bit. But I think at the time they had like 3 or 4 cases in '83. That's when the CDC was pushing them to test the blood, and they said no. Particularly the American Red Cross, who was a nonprofit, they didn't want to lose their gay donors, and they didn't want to spend the money, which was been very expensive, to test the blood. So it shows that a bit in the resistance of the blood banks. There is another scene, I kind of love this line, I don't know if it's actually from the book, where the basically group of people who top blood banks and people involved in the blood industry vote on whether to test the blood, and the majority of them say no. And he asks them, what happened when doctors become businessmen? Where do people turn to for doctors? And that is very much represents what happened with the blood industry. They were so obsessed with the bottom line that they didn't care about that they were killing people. So, there was also a representation, the film, again, they haven't seen the age things, where they show a very wealthy woman where a member of the CDC comes and tells them after she had heart surgery, she ended up with a bunch of opportunistic infections. And the CDC breaks it to them. It's like, your doctors are hiding this from you. One of your blood donors was an AIDS patient. Now, what really happened was this was a grandmother who, I believe she had a hip replacement. I could be wrong. I have to go back and look at the book. But she started getting opportunistic infections. Her granddaughter got suspicious and started nosing around and figured out that her grandmother, basically, she was getting this skin cancer. And she's like, this is typically showing up in people who had AIDS. Because they did eventually decide, by 83, they decided on a name. Because before they were calling it GRID, which had to do with gay, or the gay cancers. They do bring this up, which it's not. Because again, they wanted, like, this is not a gay disease. They were very obsessed with it being a gay disease. But again, this granddaughter figured this out by nosing around, and they did end up suing. She found out that the blood banks knew by 83 that they should be testing the blood. They refused, and that they were giving AIDS to people. And the granddaughter was livid, and the family didn't end up suing. And yes, they were very, very wealthy. So, but they kind of show that, and I do believe there was probably more lawsuits. Shilts does not go into that that much in the book, but they do show that this was something that happened, and it's what spurred the banks to start paying attention. So again, the film is very, very good at that. It shows a lot of the composites, but it shows the emotion. That's what it's good at. It also shows a lot of the statistics. As throughout the book, it shows through each point how many people are infected, how many people have died, so, of the disease. And it does show a little bit of what's going on at the Pasteur Institute in France, where one of the hospitals does get known for treating AIDS patients, which they're not happy about, but how they discovered what the virus was, and how they had to constantly feed their samples in order to keep them alive, because otherwise, basically, the T cells were being destroyed, because that's what happens in an AIDS patient. Their immune system is shot. So again, it's very good at representing a lot of the moving parts that went on in the book, that went on in real life, and it showed a lot of the statistics and those numbers, which are very, very frightening. It ends... It's kind of iffy when it ends, because you see Krauss in the hospital, very, very sick. He dies in 86. And you see a lot of news broadcasts. That's one thing the film is weird on. With the exception of the gay newspapers, and very few of them, the regular press paid no attention until about 1985. And they don't show this in the film, and this is when Rock Hudson announced he collapsed in a lobby of the Ritz Hotel in Paris because he was going there for experimental treatments, and eventually he admitted he had AIDS. And that's when it blew up. And yeah, there was a lot of people who had been working on this forever were kind of pissed off about this. In the film, they do not show this, because they don't show the fact that Rock Hudson basically blew this thing wide open and threw it in the public eye, because before that nobody was paying any attention to it. They allude to this with a line from Mary Guinan when she's talking to Richard Gere's character, when he asks her, like, what is this called? It's like, the gay press calls it gay cancer, or I think something else, and the straight press calls it nothing, because they're not paying attention. The film shows a little bit too much of it being on the news, which it wasn't, again, until 1985. Ronald Reagan didn't actually say the words AIDS until, I think, 87. So he pretty much ignored it, even though he knew it existed. They were going through trying to get funds through Congress. They show a little bit of that. But again, the film is very good at showing a condensed version of what happened and a little bit more drama. But again, there was a lot of infighting, so it's hard to show a lot of that. The film gets the emotion of the book, and it wakes people up to the fact of the chaos that happened and everything. And the infighting, not as much with the gay community. You don't see quite as much of that. There is a line, which I love, which is true, where a owner of a bathhouse tells Don Francis, in real life, the owner of the bathhouse told Dr. Randomly, where am I going here? It was, I just had his name a second ago. Marcus Conant is who he actually told, but his lines, and this is true to real life, we get them on the way in, you get them on the way out. Essentially implying that they did not care that they were killing people, and they knew it, and they just didn't care. It's like, so we're getting their money while they're alive. You're getting them as they get sick and die. This was really said, and they kind of show that as almost a break in the gay community, so to speak, because these were gay men who owned these bathhouses, and they did not care. And it shows some of the apathy of it, of the disease, and some of the anger, where they do try to do some interviews and certain gay men are pissed off. I mean, you can't really blame them. A lot of these guys were dying in their 30s. These are late 20s, early 30s. When they're dying, they're in the prime of their lives, and all of a sudden they're dying, and they're ticked off. So, but the film does a good representation of that. Some of the events are iffy and very shortened, and you have a lot of composites going on here in real people. So, but it invokes the emotion. It's a very, very good film. I saw this before I read the book. The book is also very, very good. I highly recommend both of them if you want to have a good look at a lot of what happened. One thing to take into account, particularly when dealing with the patient zero and some of the science, is this film. The book came out in 1987. The film came out in 1993. Its science is what they knew at the time, and was representing the knowledge that was had at the time. So it's as I said, I think in my book review, it's a good way as a window into time. You are seeing things as they were known at that moment. So in the film, that is the same way. You're looking at it as it is known. At the end, it shows, I believe, a 1986 gay parade. It does show Bill Krause's character collapsing. I don't think that's true. I don't think he was there. I think he was in the hospital by this point. Because again, he died by, I think he died sometime in 86. Yeah, he died on January 11th, 1986. So, he was relatively young. Again, he was born in 1947, so he was young. He was just in his 30s when he died. But that's kind of how it ends. It ends with this huge AIDS parade, and Krause kind of dying. And then you see it has a huge montage of a variety of things that happened after the fact, which is very, very touching. You see a lot of people who had denied that they died of AIDS, like Liberace and Freddie Mercury, who didn't admit he had AIDS until, less than 24 hours before he died. It shows a lot of the signs of how people were saying, it's like, I don't want to die of red tape, which was very, very true of the time. So it's very poignant in what it does, and it does show there's a lot of information dumped in the very end of this film, in writing on the screen during this kind of ending montage about what happens to Don Francis. Now, at the end of the book, which may be what his plans were at the time, again, the book came out in 87, he was planning on going back to Africa and working with the World Health Organization after he was in San Francisco, because he was already transferred, and he was essentially becoming redundant. What he does end up doing, he does transfer the CDC in San Francisco, and then he goes on to try to work on a vaccine. which has yet to materialize. We have treatments. AIDS is a survivable disease, but we do not have any vaccines. I think he's since retired. Is he? Yeah, he's still alive. But it leaves, yeah. Let's see. Yeah, he's still kind of working on infectious disease. So, as of like 2004, at least according to the Wikipedia page, he's still alive. He may have retired by now. Again, he was born in 1947, so he's getting into his he's in his 70s at this point. So, but again, at the time he was planning to go there and it's implied that he's planning on going back to Africa and working at the AIDS epidemic there. In the film, it says what he was doing now, where he retired from the CDC. And, did he retire from the CDC at the time of this? Let's see. Let's see. Where the heck? Did he retire? It's going to tell me. Probably not. Yeah, he retired in like 93. So right around the time of this came out, he had left the CDC. So it updates that. It also updates some of the issues with Gallo and the Pasteur Institute, where lawsuits and things were going on. So it updates some of that stuff that's still up in the air when the book came out in 87. So it's a very, very good film. It does a lot of compressions. I do recommend both it and the book. The book goes into a great deal more detail. The film is a good entryway. I would say this. It's a good door into understanding the emotions and the frustrations that were going on at the time. And the very end of it, where they do this huge montage of all the people that had died, the AIDS quilt, and all that started happening after 85, when this blew up in the media, and the early 90s. In fact, let's see, the Wikipedia page shows me who on earth they have. A bunch of people in the montage. Yeah, the closing montage. It shows people like Bobby Campbell, who is in the film. He was one of the first poster boys for what they call GRID, which is gay cancer. Ryan White, who's somebody I'm aware of, because his story was used very much when I was a kid in the 90s to tell us that you can't get AIDS from anything but blood transfer. He was a young boy who, I believe he captured it through a blood transfusion. He was contaminated factor 8, which means because he was a hemophiliac. And he became the poster child for HIV/AIDS in the United States after failing to be readmitted to school following a diagnosis of AIDS, because he was a hemophiliac, so he got AIDS through no fault of his own. It shows Rock Hudson, who was the big name, Liberace, Freddie Mercury, quite a few other people, many of which I do not obviously know. I do believe, can't remember who on earth was it. They showed the actor who was, if you're unaware, the Brady Bunch, the father, the actor who played the father. He died. He was gay. He died of AIDS. I'm trying to see what his name was. See if I can find who he was. Let me pop this up here. Let's see. They list the entire names. Robert Reed. So he died. Let's see. When did he show he died? Because he died in 92, and he died of AIDS. So I believe he died of AIDS, because it shows him at the end of the. He was diagnosed with colon cancer, but let's see. That's what he actually died of. He was gay. His death was solely attributed to cancers, but details of his death specific were made public that he was HIV positive. So they don't know whether he got it from sex with other men. He was gay. it was known that he was gay, or through something else, because he kept his life very, very private, but he was HIV positive, so it's possible his colon cancer was caused by AIDS. The film does show this huge montage of a variety of people. For people in my generation and younger, it's probably a good idea to look up the Wikipedia page so you can identify some of these people. Because, again, I didn't know who half of them were. And I was an 80s kid. So, obviously, I know who Liberace is. I had no idea who Rock Hudson was. I'm not fond of classic movies. But you know a variety of... there's quite a few people, famous people, who died of this. I knew who Ryan White was because, again, it was part of our education. So... But that's what the film is good at. The book is giving you a lot of the details, a lot of the facts, a lot of the conflicts. The film gives you the emotion. The film captures that emotion of the frustration and the stonewalling and the arguments within the government, within doctors, and also showing people dying. I mean, yes, it does, like the book, they have a tendency to slightly demonize the, what was his name? The French and Canadian airline steward. Let me see if I can find his name here. Goutin Degas. So he was a French-Canadian airline steward who was an early AIDS patient. In fact, the film does not show him. I'm seeing a picture of him, and it looks very, very different from the film. As patient zero in Bill Darrow's study on how AIDS is transmitted. No, he did not actually bring it to the United States. Again, it came through the Haitian population from Haiti, from Africa, in the 60s. But they didn't know that. I think that was information that came out in like 2010. But they kind of represent him. But again, he's also a composite character of gay men's attitudes and wanting to have lots and lots of sex. So, which was a lot of gay men at that time. But that was the 80s. So, at least the early 80s and the 70s, that was the attitude. So this film, again, is very, very good at getting to the heart of it. And touching your heartstrings and giving you some of the information of the death tolls, the sicknesses, and all the fighting. That's why I highly recommend this. I also really, really recommend that book. This is a great film. The book is fantastic. Both serve a really good purpose if you were studying the AIDS epidemic, which I do think as a parent, I probably will, because it's important. And it's not over. It's not an epidemic. It's endemic, because it exists. We don't have a vaccine for it. Most diseases in our no-man are endemic. They're ongoing. They have not gone away. There's no vaccine for them. And people are still getting sick from it. It's just less common in the U.S. And I do not know if I can click on the AIDS epidemic, but it's very, very bad in Africa. It's still in the United States. It's just now a survival disease. It's not a death sentence. So that is it for this review. If you like what you see, really check out the book review if you haven't. Otherwise, check out the rest of my channel. This is one of my heavier topics. I have these sprinkled periodically. A lot of times I cover children's picture books and more entertaining films. Not that this film isn't really, really good, and very entertaining and good to watch, but it's not as happy as some of the other films I cover. I really do focus mostly on children's stuff, with a sprinkling of non-religious, aka secular homeschooling materials and a little bit of travel stuff thrown in there because we are a homeschooling family. That's what I kind of gear things toward. In words of that, one thing for homeschooling parents, recommendation 16 at the youngest, I think, depending on kids' maturity level, for this film. Though maybe the book is definitely 16. You can probably watch it a little bit younger with the maybe middle school with the film. Just don't read the books until they're a bit older, because the book is far more intense and far more detailed and far harder in the intellectual sense to get through. The film is a little bit more lighthearted. I do not know what it's rated. I'm gonna look at the disc myself, see if it's telling me if it's rated anything, because it was a TV movie. So, they want to tell me what you're rated off the top of my head. Normally it says these things. No, it is rated R. There it is. It is in fact rated R, probably for its content. But again, as homeschool parents, you can choose. Middle school would probably be the youngest, but again, the book, definitely 16 at the youngest for it. So that's if you're looking at the AIDS epidemic, which again, I really highly encourage people to do because it's an important part of history and the present. So again, like and subscribe if you like what you see. Check out the rest of my channel. Again, a lot more other stuff. This is one of my heavier topics. So thank you.